Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Fatma. I'm the head of community at ThinkHuman, and I'm located in Tunis, Tunisia. I would love to start with checking in with all of you before we even introduce our beautiful panelists today to have a conversation about our workforce. Please let us know where you're dialing in from and how you're coming in feeling to the conversation today. It could be just one word to describe. So, as I said, I'm Fatma. I'm dialing in from Tunis, Tunisia, and I'm feeling excited and super grateful to be with these panelists, to be with all of you, to be in this conversation, looking into the future of how we do work that is acknowledging of our businesses and our humans. So thank you so much for being here. The room is getting filled. So as you're coming in, everyone, please let us know where you're dialing in from. We usually have an international community. So I'm happy to start reading. We have people from Oregon, from Alaska, from the Philippines, San Antonio, Atlanta, New York City. Welcome, New York. I miss you so much. Columbus, Tennessee, Chicago, Mexico. Let us know also how you're coming in feeling. We have hopeful here for the future, indeed. I also, after talking to these panelists, feel very hopeful that we have incredible leaders in the world changing the way we do work. And some people are feeling open. Open is a good one for a webinar. We're going to have many conversations and we want to include you in them as well. Please make this conversation yours. Interject with questions, insight, feedback, and we will do our best to bring them into the floor as well. Yes, the music can go down. Sorry about that. I love greeting people with music. Alrighty, so let's talk about why we are here today. We are witnessing a significant challenge facing today's workforce, including high levels of stress and declining employee well-being, and disengagement across many regions. We have been witnessing a shift even before COVID on how we talk about our workforce and how we want to create a holistic approach to taking care of our businesses and our humans. And now it is more important than ever. Even before the pandemic, we've been noticing that. And right now, with the economic constraints, we are experiencing the tremendous amount of layoffs past year. Gallup's report revealed that this past year, only 20% of employees worldwide are engaged at work. Only 20%. Stress in the workplace is at an unprecedented high, with almost 50% of employees reporting they feel stressed on a daily basis. Only 26% of our employees strongly agree that they receive adequate recognition for their work. I'm sharing these stats so we are present to what is happening in our workforce today and to also talk about the gap that we are witnessing and how we can move into forwarding solutions. What I believe is this is encouraging us to look in the way we plan care for the health of both our workforce and our businesses, and that we need to redefine how success looks like. So this webinar would not be happening if it wasn't for the amazing work of our partners and our team at ThinkHuman and working together to create and provide the safe space for these real conversations. I'm thrilled to introduce Bucketlist, Polly, and ThinkHuman. Bucketlist is a rewards platform that empowers companies to recognize and reward their employees, fostering a culture of appreciation and motivation. Polly is an HR platform that enhances employee engagement and feedback by seamlessly integrating with Slack and Microsoft Teams to capture real-time insights and improve workplace communication. At ThinkHuman, we offer leadership development and manager training through cohort-based training, executive coaching, and leadership offsites. We partner with L&D and HR leaders to launch and facilitate training to elevate leaders at all levels around human-centered skills, like inclusive leadership, receiving and giving feedback, and managing up. Towards the end of the webinar and even in the middle, I'll be launching a poll, and please let us know which of the organizations are partnered with us today would you like to hear from or have conversations with about what they are offering. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our amazing panelists. You're seeing your beautiful faces already. I'm going to name you one by one, and please say hello to the camera. Katie Wray, Senior Manager of People at Culture at Bucketlist Rewards. Welcome. Bilal Aijazi, CEO and co-founder of Polly. Welcome, Bilal. Meredith Haberfeld, founder and CEO of ThinkHuman, welcome, and Jenny Young, founder of Chief Mama Officer and former HR executive. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hello, so happy to be here with everybody, especially this beautiful international crew that is here joining us in the chat.
Actually, please let us know, all of you, where are you dialing in from and how you're feeling into your own space?
I can start. I am coming in from Monterey County, California, so the west coast of the US, and I am coming in with cold feet. Not about this event, but just it's like starting to get a little chilly here. So cold feet and a happy heart.
Very good. Bilal?
Yeah, I'm dialing in from Islamabad, Pakistan, and I'm feeling warm and fuzzy because I have a great cup of tea and ready to go to have a fantastic conversation with these wonderful panelists.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Jenny?
I can go next. I'm calling in from Qualicum Beach on the west coast of British Columbia, and I'm feeling energized. Thanks in part to my big cup of coffee next to me, and excited for the conversation.
Hey y'all, I am Jenny and I am dialing in from Missoula, Montana. That's Western Montana, 3 hours south of Glacier National Park. And I am feeling lit. I feel really excited to connect with our panel today.
Very nice. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with setting the stage. Where do you all think the gap is in the way we are approaching right now and the way we evaluate our workforce for the future? What are we missing? And how can we close the gap between taking care of our business and the human needs?
I'll continue to be, if you're not going to pick on us, Fatma, I'll jump in. I'll say, I think that the pendulum is always swinging in terms of how we're thinking about people in the organization, and where during the pandemic, there was a lot of focus and money spent on taking care of the humans. I think the pendulum has swung the other direction right now. And, you know, as happens in the world. And so where there was a few years where it was like, take care of the people, take care of the people, take care of the people. Now it's like, enough taking care of the people. Now we got to take care of the business. And, you know, either way that the pendulum swings too far is never so great. And for anyone, and including, you know, both those poles at putting the business and the people at two different ends of the spectrum. So I feel like that merge back toward what is that Venn diagram overlap is the focal area that I'm hearing from a lot of people right now as they're trying to plan for 2025 and beyond. How about you, Katie?
Thanks, Meredith. I'd say the biggest gap would be maybe focusing too much on current performance with the team and maybe not enough on potential or adaptability. I think as leaders, we have a tendency to evaluate people for the roles that they're in rather than the roles that they might be able to grow into. So from a business perspective, this means we might miss some future ready skills like innovation, or maybe you have some tech savvy folks on your team. And on the human side, sometimes we're not tapping into people's aspirations or offering them clear paths. So what's missing, kind of to Meredith's point, is that balance, evaluating what the business needs and what motivates people to stay and grow with us as a company.
I can just jump in and tack on to that. I mean, I think when you look at how capital markets change, which ultimately dictates how all of us in the business world then react, when interest rates are high, people start thinking short term and holding on to their cash and all of this. And where that hurts you is that it creates a gap in long-term thinking and long-term investment in your people. And I think those kinds of things can stunt ultimately the business long term if you're not correctly investing in innovation, in, you know, that talent that's going to help you build the next decade of your business, not just the next 2 quarters. And I think like that's where that pendulum can swing too far. And like, you know, collectively as business leaders, we have to advise our businesses, our board of directors, our teams to continue to think long term, even as the market kind of shifts in how it's swinging in terms of valuing short term versus long term performance. Ultimately, that long term is going to come from innovative people, even with the rise of AI. Nobody is suggesting that your innovation in your business is going to come from some AI tool. Like maybe you can leverage that to help drive more efficiency, but the innovation fundamentally has to come from people, that has to come from a long-term perspective, and that has to come from investment in that workforce. And that's ultimately the right thing for the business long term too, even if it doesn't feel like it in the next quarter or two.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll add on to that, and tacking on to what Meredith mentioned earlier about the pendulum swinging of this, from the focus on people around, 2018, 2019, 2020, and then the pendulum swinging back to the business. I and we've seen this, in the market with many tech companies facilitating layoffs. And I feel that it's led to a talent crisis here, where with the pandemic in 2020, a lot of companies made a decision to go fully remote. And now we're seeing the pendulum swing back to return to office and hybrid workplaces where a lot of the talent went remote, right? And so there's a talent shortage in those markets, in San Francisco and, LA, New York, some of those bigger geos, where there used to be a significant pool of talent, and now that talent is dispersed. And so, thinking about, what's missing is the full spectrum of the human, and where the humans are at current state and future state. And there being a generational transition of, there's workforce demographics of, more Gen Z and millennials, rising in leadership ranks, and being conscious of that when you're thinking about developing your pipeline and the needs of those, demographics of Gen Z and millennial employees. I also think about, we had a discussion as a panel earlier around workplace flexibility, right? And just being able to understand the needs of your employees, and flexibility, and having that baked into their schedules. I think it's really challenging, especially personally as a parent of two little ones, a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old. Flexibility is one of my most critical needs around my schedule, of being able to do, preschool drop off and pick up, and being available for my 7-month-old. And so definitely considering the full spectrum human needs when planning, your business plan ahead.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go off script here a little bit, but we talked about externally the gap that we've been observing. I would love to hear, as the leaders that you are, leading teams today, how is that also, this gap is also sitting with all of you, and how is it informing the way you're leading?
Specifically, Fatma, how's which part informing the way we're leading?
This gap that we're talking about taking care of the business versus the human, and the way we evaluate our workforce.
I think what I would say is that, and I think people have hinted at this so far, but like it's a false dichotomy, right? Like taking care of, at least like, I think the majority of the folks that are on the panel today, and the majority of folks probably in the audience, are companies that pride themselves on innovation in terms of bringing that innovation, innovative products to market, and bringing new things that can ultimately drive a more productive future. That happens with really, really talented people on your team, and taking care of them and making sure that you're elevating them. And that is something that you have to invest in through whatever cycles you're going through, the ups or the downs. And, I think it's something that if you neglect that, you're really not taking care of the business. You're really not thinking long term. if you're like in one of those situations where maybe you have to answer to the stock market, even there, like you might be optimizing for short-term value, but not for long-term value. And so for bringing that back to like how I think about that at Poly is I just think about where we're trying to go, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and what kind of investments that we need to make in our people today, whether they're people that are at our organization or people that we're hoping will join our organization, to be able to hit those goals. And it kind of doesn't matter where the macro is if you're thinking from that kind of a perspective. Like you might behave differently from a micro perspective just by like, hey, we are able to raise more money and invest it in more risky kind of endeavors or more risky channels or so on and so forth. That risk tolerance kind of changes a bit. But I think long term, how you think about leadership, how you think about investing in innovation, how you think about building your team, like should not change regardless of what's in vogue and what's not.
Yeah, I would, if I give kind of like my foundational sentence, it's taking care of the health of the whole with love or care. And the health of the whole means not indexing on how do we care for this individual, that individual, this individual, that individual, and making big business decisions about that, but instead the business decisions through the lens of the health of the whole. But then sometimes those business decisions that are in honor of the health of the whole do have ramifications that are challenging or painful to individuals, and then doing that part with love and care.
Yeah, I really think about that stat, Fatma, that you mentioned earlier, that 50% of employees feel stressed on a daily basis. I mean, that's burnout right there. I mean, just imagine living your nervous system being in that state of stress day in and day out. And I think that's really the pressure that organizations place on their people when they are thinking from a short-term perspective of, okay, we need to, get to a place of profitability, or, we need to hit this result in this quarter. And, it's really, it's that downward corrosive pressure, right, that people are feeling to perform. And, I'm curious of like, how many of us here do we do our best work when we feel that stressed? And, my take on this is, when I, mentioned evaluating and thinking and assessing the full spectrum human, mental health and well-being is a critical aspect of that. And unless your people are in a place of a sound mental state, emotional state, right, it's from there they're able to produce their best work. So really thinking about how we can, support our team members from a mental health perspective.
Yeah, just to build off of what Jenny said, I attended a session and it was about leaders supporting mental health in the workplace. And the stat that shocked me was around that your leader has the same effect on your mental health as your spouse. Which to me, I was like, whoa, like thinking about that. So just keeping that in mind as a leader and leading from a place of care and and checking in on the regular, not just once a year, not just at, regular scheduled intervals, but on the regular, and just creating that connection so that there's open two-way communication always, I think is just really important to keep to keep people at the kind of center of your business, because they're the ones driving your business forward as well.
Let's continue with you, Katie, about the two-way communication between the business and the humans. What do you think we need, like what examples have you seen that could be good to truly understand and address our workforce needs?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of two-way communication is having a variety of ways to communicate. Some folks like to give feedback or communicate asynchronously, some want face-to-face. So providing different avenues for people to communicate with their leaders, anywhere from like your pulse surveys to we do stay interviews to talk to folks as well, checking in. One thing we did this summer that was really effective, we changed the way we communicate, like the big picture plans for the team on our weekly huddle. We switched from a status update weekly to more of a big picture sharing, long-term goals, how everybody contributes to those goals. And then kind of towards the end of the quarter, when we'd implemented this new format, we hosted an AMA session, so an Ask Me Anything session, where we had the senior leaders as our panel, and folks could submit anonymous questions ahead of time if they weren't comfortable. They could put their hand up, they could submit it in the chat, however they were comfortable. And it was a really effective way to bridge that two-way communication and have access to the senior leadership, clearing up things that might be on people's mind, issues, current topical issues, and yeah, I got good feedback. So it's going to be definitely something that we continue to do on the regular.
I can jump in with one additional thought on the heels of that, Katie, because we, I mean, at ThinkHuman, we are all obviously about the humans. With the changes and kind of trends coming, like AI and the gig economy. I mean, I think I saw a stat that by 2030, it's expected that 50% of US companies will be employing large gig workforces. I mean, that's a big change. And so I think organizations planning for, okay, with these changes, with AI coming in, with gig economy shifts, like as these things are happening, communicating in a future forward way to people, like these things are coming, not necessarily in our organization, not tomorrow, but like this is the way that the world is moving. What does that mean for how we need to be agile and adaptable so that people don't feel like, oh, there's like a secret hiding under the carpet that's going to come out and get me, but being transparent about the ways that the world is moving and how as an organization we are thinking about that. I know that wasn't about two-way communication, but I think it prompts two-way communication. It's like by leadership getting that out there, people are then able to be responsive rather than being in the kind of family that's like, oh, we don't talk about that.
Right. Yes, Meredith. What you're sharing is what I consider context, right? Sharing the context within of what we're operating within. And so actually yesterday when the five of us were connecting, we were talking about best practices with company communications around getting clear on what the purpose of the organization is, right? Like, why do we exist? And then, with the company values, how do we behave in the context of why do we exist? And then what's the vision for the organization? What's our aspiration of the problem to solve that's out there? And then that all translates into, a company strategy, right? How will we succeed in accomplishing this vision? And then that can turn into, objectives and key results and priorities. What's the most important thing for us to accomplish together? And, Jen, you were talking about doing more with less in the environment. I think in a two-way communication with the organization about do more with less is how do you maniacally prioritize? Because there's always thousands of things that you could do, but what are the initiatives that are going to have the most impact on what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, right? Like top 3 to 5 for the organization, and how do you get the entire organization to rally and align on those top 5 priorities and equip your employees to say no, right? As leaders, you need to demonstrate saying no to initiatives that might not align to those top 5. It's very easy to get to focus on the fires, right? But it might not necessarily align to moving the needle on what your organization is focused on accomplishing.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, taking that broad strokes message of what your goals are, what you believe as an organization, what impact you're bringing to the world, and then just showing up, being present as a leader with it, and doing that in different ways. And we talked a little bit yesterday also about just like you need to have different strokes for different folks, whether that's a pulse survey, whether that's a town hall Q&A, whether that's in your Slack or your Zoom or your Teams or wherever your team hangs out. You kind of need to show and talk about that message and package it up in different ways. So like, we're in annual planning season for a lot of companies. Our company is also undergoing that planning. And one of the tactics that I have for doing that is we'll have an open AMA, but I'll actually come out there and say like, hey, on this slide, here's a question I'm not hearing you all asking. Here's like what I would be asking in your position. And that kind of breaks that ice on working through the taboos so that we don't end up being like those families where we say that we don't talk about certain things. Instead, you just like take the thing that you're not supposed to talk about and just put it front and center so that you give your team and your humans the space to come in and be like, oh, I've broken that wall. I can now like really be real here and be honest with where the gaps are because ultimately, and this is natural. I don't think this is like deceitful or anything on the behalf of leadership when this happens. Leaders tell stories. Stories are how human beings connect, but stories are also very convenient in how all the plot lines connect and all of that. And you need to find the edges and the gaps in that so that there's a complete understanding of that strategy and of those goals and how you're going to bring that to life. And I think it is really, really important to really provide those different strokes for different folks, those different ways of communicating to enable a complete understanding for all the different ways that people absorb that information. And that needs to happen through multiple repeated exposures and also through demonstrated behaviors like saying no to initiatives that might not align to the stated objectives.
And I think if those things aren't clear, like those big rocks, I think we talked in one of our pre-call about the rocks versus the sand, the rocks versus the pebbles versus the sand. And if the rocks aren't super clear, then people just end up bogged down in the sand and the pebbles, and they're like trying to catch it all. And it behooves the leadership. I would even say it's the responsibility of leadership to make sure that those rocks are super clear at every level so that people don't need someone else to make the decision for them of like, excuse me, what am I supposed to prioritize here? But instead can say, based on what I understand the rocks to be, here's the trade-off that I think needs to be made that's in the best interest of the organization. And, maybe there's a buy-in that needs to happen of, please, I'm looking for your validation that this is the right trade-off to make versus another trade-off. Because if we don't make this trade-off, here are the consequences. So I think in terms of skills, one is ensuring leadership knows how to both make those rocks that clear and cascade that through at every level, and then empowering people to be able to make those trade-offs. And then on the workforce side, having people be clear that actually that responsibility lives with them to be able to understand, okay, I need to make sure I know what the rocks are and that I need to be able to make those trade-offs and then manage up to say, is this the right trade-off that I am planning to make?
Mm-hmm. From everything I'm hearing from all of you, I feel like the key word is prioritizing and equipping leaders with the capacity to prioritize for themselves and also for their teams and be able to clearly communicate that. And that's something that some in the community are also bringing up. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I was
you-
just Fatma and Meredith, what's coming up for me is it's a skill set to cultivate. It doesn't come naturally to people to prioritize and to communicate what those priorities are. And so being able to have that in itself be a priority of manager and leadership development at your organization of how do we as an executive team, one, get clear on what our priorities are and then actually communicate that down, right? And then tell the next layer of this is your job to communicate this, right? Getting really crystal clear, and this is your job responsibility to communicate what the priorities are and then cascade them down. I find a lot of times organizations get stuck in the senior leadership manager level because the executive team can be completely clear on what the priorities are, but then somehow from a communication standpoint, they don't necessarily cascade down to the org. And so if you're able to find those avenues at a company level, at a department level, then management team level, right, to be able to repeatedly and consistently share what the priorities are, and then also share that it's their responsibility to cascade this down, it has to be repeated. I mentioned repetition, because a lot of the times we just get caught in the day-to-day fires, right? And then just being able to have those North Star priorities to remember to go back to on a daily basis.
Yeah, I'll
So
actually just
Jenny,
pick up on something that you said, Jenny, which is like, hey, I found that it doesn't come natural to leaders to actually communicate that way. I actually I think it should feel unnatural, in fact, how often you have to repeat yourself to actually drive enough exposure to folks. Like you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, I mean, again, we're in this annual planning phase right now, and I found myself telling the team, like, I know you're hearing this for the fourth time, but I want you to really hear it this time. And it like sure enough, we got different questions the fourth time we talked about that specific initiative. And I think like it is unnatural to talk about things over and over again and to tell the same story. It'll feel tired to you because, when you're delivering it, you've already heard it like 10 times in your head or rewritten it in your script. But there's always going to be those folks that are just hearing it in a different way. Just like when you watch your favorite movie or read a novel for the nth time, that's a different experience the next time that you heard it. And I think for something that's important as when I'm spending the 40 or more hours that I'm spent working per week on having that few extra minutes of context continuously, it will feel unnatural, and that's okay. We should actually encourage that feeling of an unnatural amount of repetition and an unnatural amount of exposure to help our team plan better.
anyone wanted to add something?
I just want to say, Bilal, I feel validated by that. And it does feel unnatural when you're repeating yourself. But I think there's the stat, something like you have to repeat something 7 times before it stays with someone. So I try to remember that and communicate it in different ways and different mediums when you're trying to get a message across.
And somebody in the chat said, Jennifer in the chat said, I often find myself wondering whether or not leadership itself really understands the priorities. So the discipline of having to repeat it is good for everybody, including leadership if they're not super embedded and directed by that.
Let's move to talk. Go ahead, Jenny.
Oh, I was just going to comment that, Bilal, I totally get that, of that being unnatural to repeat self. And then I'm just laughing inside here because maybe it's because I grew up with a mother who repeated herself all the time. And so it's natural for me to repeat myself when I don't feel heard.
I would like for us to also talk about the growth opportunities. We're bringing up capacity to prioritize here and to be able to repeat ourselves. I think that's also, it takes a level of growth to understand that we can get over what is coming up as an aspect of the ego and to just repeat ourselves for the sake of the team to hear what they need to hear. So how can organizations balance the growth opportunities for our workforce while still meeting our business goals? How do we go about these growth opportunities, you all think?
I mean, I think we are in an era where if growth mindset isn't at the center of your culture, it's tricky. Like the world just is getting faster and faster, and our ability to adapt and change getting more and more in demand. And so having that agility and adaptability, not just like, oh, I can pivot from this to that, but I can shift and grow my way of doing things. So if I'm a leader and I'm accustomed to leading a co-located workforce, and now I have to lead a remote and international workforce, not being like, well, I've got the same tricks in my bag and I keep using them, but having people across the organization really embedded in a growth mindset about the business, oneself, and others. And I think that comes from expectation setting and training. And then also process, like having processes where people are setting developmental goals for themselves and aligning on those with their manager, or in some cases in a team with their peers to say, like, here's the direction I see, and then getting feedback and normalizing those conversations so that across the organization, the expectation is set. We're all in a growth zone. We have a moment to pause, whether that's quarterly, annually, but some kind of structure to reflect on what are our developmental goals, align on those with others, and then, training opportunities to be at work on those things. And those training opportunities don't have to be high investment. That can be, we could save that for another question, but there's a lot of ways to do that without throwing money at something.
Yeah, I was
Yeah, I
going
mean,
to say, I think, oh, sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, feel free to.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think it's important to balance growth with an immediate goals. It comes down to integrating development into the flow of your work. So creating opportunities for folks to take on stretch projects or cross trains in ways that align with the needs of the business. Another way is having a mentorship program. So, you have mentorship opportunities internally where you have institutional knowledge with leaders helping folks tackle their day-to-day challenge and business problems, and they're growing and learning from that, and they're learning by doing, which is so impactful. So, and that's a low cost thing you can set up internally. Something we've done. We have a whole template and agenda to keep the meetings productive, and we've had really good feedback on that from the team.
Yeah, what I was going to say, and I think it builds perfectly on what Katie was saying here, which is like you need to balance that growth versus immediate goals. I really think of a business in terms of risk appetite and what level of risk you're willing to take where. Like, not all business decisions have the same degree of risk associated with them, and not all business environments have the same degree of risk associated with them. Again, when capital is cheap, people can take bigger risks. When capital is more expensive, you can take less risks. Similar story with your, kind of balance sheet situation or whatnot. And so I think it's really important to understand what is the risk profile that your organization is willing to take, and then snapping people to that, and then taking those bets appropriately based on that. If that risk profile is zero, you probably need to run. Like that's in a fast changing environment, that's probably not the environment that you're trying to create. So that risk profile does need to be there. And I think it's worth talking about and being clear on, as just like, these are the swings that we're willing to take, and these are the swings that we're not. This is like, we're willing to put ourselves out so far that it's going to put this part of the business at risk, and we might be okay with that. And I think when you have an understanding of that, you can then find the growth opportunities there, because underneath that risk, there's always going to be some growth behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Bilal. I often think about, when I observe high performers creating an outsized result, like, what is their behavior? Like, what sets them apart? And what I've noticed is that, they're the ones who are identifying the problems and the issues that need to be solved and proactively putting a solution together, right? So they're the ones who are, creating space and time of, gosh, like, I'm facing, this personal issue, and I know the rest of the team is facing it. Okay, like, how might I solve this and, create an outsized result for the team and the customer? And so there is this element of, both the organization creating growth ops that also help the business meet immediate needs, and there's like this element on the team member or leader to directly solve the issue for themselves, and demonstrating that leadership proactively is what I've seen set high performers apart.
Anyone else wants to
Pausing because I think there's a discomfort for me in that not everyone is going to be a high performer. And so in making decisions about how do you do more with less, obviously as an organization, it's best to index for who are the people that are really going to be proactive problem solvers, who are going to identify their own growth gaps, who are going to take the context and make decisions with it, versus those people who might be great in other ways, but they're kind of waiting for their leader or for the organization to guide those things. So I say I have a discomfort with that because, you know, when you're trying to do more with less, the easy decision is let's index for the high performers who are gonna take that initiative and solve the problems. Just really quickly, Kaylee, you asked in the chat, what's a swing? Bilal had mentioned something about, Bilal, maybe you should say it, but something about you have to choose which swings you're going to make. How did you say it?
And I actually just wrote this in the chat, but what I meant was like the types of investments or growth opportunities a business will take. Sorry, it's a baseball term of just swinging the bat at the ball. So like what are the opportunities that you're going to go after?
Yeah, Meredith, I hear you. Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Please,
Jenny.
Oh, I hear you on that and that discomfort and like yes, and to your point, not everyone is the high performer, right? And well, organizations do over index on that. So this is where I believe manager enablement is key, right? Where the manager is able to, they're acting as the shepherd for the team member to reflect back, like, this is where you're strong in, right? And this is where, you know, I could see you taking on a stretch project, right? To stretch and grow your competency in this specific area, right? And that project would be aligned to whatever it is that needs to be solved from an immediate perspective for the business, right? So I think it's, you know, both and, like the proactiveness of team members and manager enablement.
A data piece that I would like to also share here from Gallup's data report of 2024 shows actually that managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement, which means that the more our managers are able to influence, inspire, and motivate the team, the more the team is engaged. So I would be curious to hear from all of you, how have you seen that play out, and how does trust also play a role in these relationships?
Katie, I would love to hear from you in your seat overseeing the people and culture function.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about like trust and engaging with the team. Is that the question, Fatma?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think transparency and consistency are two big things that you can do as an organization. I think there is like a fear around transparency, how it might backfire. But for leaders, I think modeling openness first, like sharing how you're making decisions or your process, or maybe admitting your mistakes and saying, you know, it's okay to take risks, and then, you know, we're going to learn from it. It's a learning experience. You're modeling that for your team to make a safe space for people to try things and grow and get outside of their comfort zone. And then consistency, I think ensuring communication is consistent. Mixed messaging can really erode trust fast. So if you're saying one thing one day and another the other, that can be a really fast way for employees to you know, lose trust quickly. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
And my thoughts in terms of manager impact, Fatma, are, I mean, I see managers, as I put it in the chat, the gift that keeps giving. Like, you invest there and it just ripples outward through the organization. Like, you invest in an IC, it's not that it's bad, the impact is fantastic, but it, you know, it kind of like you're just waiting for that one person to, it'll impact their team, it'll impact them in certain ways, but you invest in a manager, and then that manager is ideally, if the, you know, if the impact takes and the training or development is successful, it, you know, it doing all the things, clarifying goals, giving people context, supporting people on what their developmental goals are, all the things we're talking about, then can live inside that manager to direct report relationship, which is very hard to manage that at a at an organizational or systemic level. But when you invest in the people leaders, the time, energy, and money to develop them to be great people leaders, they then hold that ownership and spread it outward inside their teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll add to that around manager enablement is again a skill of creating psychological safety for your team and team members is also a skill to cultivate. And Katie, you nailed it, where being able to, as the leader and manager, to share your own mistakes, right? And that demonstrating that failure is okay as long as we're learning from it, right? Like, how are we going to learn from this? So I definitely believe in it being a manager and leader's role to create that container of psychological safety for an individual team member as well as the broader team. And something specific that comes up for me is, anytime that a team member has made a mistake, I'm not the first person to call it out. Even though, I notice it, I know that the team member is likely shaming themselves first, given perfectionist tendencies. And so I, like, in the one-on-one, I hold space for them to reflect, right? And being able to let them do a retro around, okay, this was the mistake. Here's how it happened. Like, here's the root cause analysis, and here's how I'm going to mitigate this going forward. Like, this isn't going to happen again. I'm going to put these these places in step to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And so it's I tune into what the team members' needs are, right? And then being able to allow them to self-reflect about the mistake, and then sharing an agreement at the end of, okay, great, like, I'll hold you accountable to that process that you just designed for yourself, right? To mitigate this mistake going forward.
And that ability to witness a teammate and them feeling witnessed actually increases trust in the relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
Bilal, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like ultimately, like I'll just echo what the panelists have already said, in that, like, that managers are the engine that is going to drive your culture forward. Every kind of microcosm of your organization gets reflected and accelerated by managers, and so having the right folks and the right growth opportunities for those managers to be able to plan out your workforce, as you're scaling, things like the right ratios to enable those managers to have the space to support their teams appropriately, is just so critical as people get underway with their planning.
And how do you influence leadership also to see recognition and recognizing a team member as not a practice that they do end of the year in their performance review, or when bonuses go out, but what are the strategies in which we can recognize our team members? Because that's also something that drives trust and also engagement as well. What would you say about recognition in this matter?
So obviously, I mean, I think that's a critical part of it, right? Like, we are learning beings. We get reinforced based on people seeing the value in what they're doing. And that happens with recognition. I think Jenny is the one who mentioned this earlier. Like, there's always 1,000 different priorities that you could go after. Being clear about what those priorities are, and then recognizing good work that helps move the needle in those priorities, is the only way that we reinforce to our teams what is important and what is valuable, while refilling people's, cups from a psychological safety, from a performance-driven culture kind of a mindset as well. Just practical ways to do this. There's obviously great software solutions to provide recognition in a lot of different ways. One simple thing that we've implemented at Poly is we have a wins channel where you can post any kind of win, and it doesn't have to be a manager. It doesn't have to be formal. We encourage people to do it on personal wins in addition to company related wins, because that gratitude is a cycle. That feeling of winning is a cycle. And that cycle, even from your personal life, will then echo into your professional life. And people will feed off that energy and drive each other forward as well. And so it's super simple, like no budget spent, no, not a huge amount of cultural reinforcement required. We just like literally created a channel called #wins, and we just post wins. And it it could be small, it could be big, it should be consistent and continuous to build that cycle going forward across your entire organization.
I love that, Bilal. I think encouraging leaders to recognize team members year round, you got to make it easy, and it should be intentional. So incorporating like regular rituals into your meetings, into your week, into leadership routines, whether it's weekly shout outs or a dedicated space, like you said, a Slack channel or software, whatever that might be. But consistent recognition, like you said, it's a feel good feedback loop. And you can tie the recognition. Something we do internally at Bucketlist is every recognition that goes out is tied to a core value. So you're celebrating people for living the core values on a day-to-day, and it really it emphasizes our culture and the core values. And one of our core values is achieve life goals. So there's even a space, like you said, to celebrate personal wins and personal achievements and share that with the team.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just plus one to what Katie and Bilal just shared. I think something else to consider is leveraging company forums like a annual company kickoff to have awards for people who have demonstrated the values. There was we did an award ceremony at my previous company at the beginning of the year where we basically had this nomination process of team members who demonstrated the 4 core values, and it went through this voting process and all of that to be able to recognize these team members for living the value day in and day out. So, thinking about it at a company recognition perspective, possibly having your CEO acknowledge birthdays and anniversaries, right? Like who doesn't like getting their birthday celebrated? I mean, maybe some people, yeah, actually, I do know some people who don't like their birthdays being celebrated, but having a shout out from your CEO, right, about happy birthday or happy work anniversary, it just is it goes a long way. A small gesture goes a long way there. And then thinking about in a department specific way, how you can, to Katie's point, put in a ritual to have shout outs and high fives to team members in a department setting. And then also on a one-on-one setting, the practice that I adopted as a manager has been kicking off the one-on-one with a virtual high five of like, this is what I saw that you did, what had incredible impact, this past week, and just wanted to give you a high five for that. So yeah, there's company department one-on-one, team and one-on-one level. There's a multitude of ways that you can incorporate no cost ways of recognizing people.
I really appreciate, Jenny, how you put it on different levels that we could actually recognize on the individual, on the team and department level, and also systemically on the organizational level, which is like the example of the wins in Slack. That's something that everybody can look at. But then it's so important to also bank on those moments where we could recognize people one-to-one, and also on department level to have like the whole group rally behind celebrating someone or something.
I'll just add in that I think what gets recognized is as important to think about as the how. So you mentioned, a few of you mentioned connecting it to values. One thing we see in organizations all the time at ThinkHuman is recognition being about like, these people worked on the weekend. Oh, you pushed this thing by pushing yourself. And then all of a sudden you have a virtuous cycle of people thinking like, oh, how I get recognized and rewarded is by burnout behaviors rather than, oh, you did this really efficient
Mhm.
trade-off and that made a difference. And so what gets recognized, I think, is a key thing to have the leadership team especially anchor in on
Mhm.
and pay attention to what they are both privately and publicly rewarding. And let's
Appreciate
not
it.
forget that promotions and raises are also a form of recognition, and people are always watching that, like, oh, okay, that got a shout out, but that got a promotion.
Mhm.
I will circle back to the how and just throw out one more practical tip that is super low cost, but I found it to be super effective, especially in remote settings. And that's video messages. Like having something that is just like personalized and momentary. Like I can say like as a CEO, I often don't feel like I have enough one-on-one time with my team to recognize a specific behavior. But what I can do is take 30 seconds to record a quick video in whatever software you want and just send it out. And it goes a super long
Oh,
way. I
wow.
mean, that I think is like it's how we can use the tools that we have in more effective ways without driving up cost of the organization in a more cost conscious environment.
And that also creates a personal way, a personable way of recognizing the person that feels more close than just sending a Slack
It's so
message.
authentic, right? It is
Yeah.
so authentic. And I think that is the key part of it is like you're showing up in a different way, and
Mhm.
that shows that you care and you thought about something.
And you're also taking a risk to put yourself on camera and send this person a note, which I don't think everybody is comfortable with.
Absolutely.
Well, we are getting to our time, and I would love to just do a last round of what would you like people to walk away with today? If it was one action, one thing that they could do differently in our workplaces, what would that be? Could be like just one phrase.
I can kick it off. I think there was a lot of really great ideas shared today, and I really am thankful for this conversation. I think there are a lot of things that you can do that are low cost or in-house to get started on some of these initiatives. So it doesn't have to break the bank. I know PNC, HR are always fighting for budget or trying to justify budget. So think about what you can do low cost or free to get some of these initiatives started and off the ground.
Think long term.
Mhm.
Think long term when it comes to your humans, think long term when it comes to your business, and you'll find those two things come together.
I'll go with be real. I think that the effort to be optimistic, I guess I would say like the care pendulum of care and candor, like bring the candor and the real, because without that, psychological safety isn't present, and people need both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think some of the themes that we heard in chat and, a lot of organizations are, operating from possibly a, more short-term perspective. And the word that comes up for me is scarcity. And so if
Mhm.
we as leaders can frame our minds from a place of abundance and, as Meredith mentioned, love and care, what might that look like, right? Like
Mhm.
if we put scarcity and fear aside, right? Like what might our organization look like if we frame it from the lens of, okay, like we have abundant resources, even though yes, we're doing more with less, right? But let's think of it from the lens of abundance versus scarcity.
Thank you, Jenny, for closing with abundance. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the panelists for your wisdom, for your presence, and for what you brought to the conversation. I know our community took a lot of really good nuggets. I see some people commenting in the chat. Thank you so much for being here, y'all, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.